Hey, welcome everybody. I'm here today with, really excited to have Matt Friedman, who's the CEO of the Mekong Club. It's an NGO that focuses on modern slavery and human trafficking, and specifically kind of works directly with corporate to understand their labor supply chain, etc. He's going to do a much better job of kind of describing what he does and what Mekong Club does. But before he gets into it, the conversation today is going to go in a lot of different directions, but we're focusing on how labor and specifically instances of forced labor or other maybe forms of modern slavery are important from an ESG perspective for modern day companies. Okay, so Matt, do you maybe want to describe yourself and what you do and what Mekong Club does?
Okay, well, I'm somebody who has focused on the issue of addressing human trafficking and modern slavery for about 35 years. I started my career with the U.S. government being posted in Nepal. I spent 8 years there, 5 years in Bangladesh, then went to Thailand, worked for the United Nations after that. Much of the time that I've been doing this, I've been exposed to both public health as well as human trafficking type things. In fact, my public health work is what contributed to me finding out about human trafficking. Back then, I had the HIV/AIDS portfolio, and we were finding girls 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive. Went to go and see what was happening with them and heard the stories about how they were tricked and deceived and forced into brothels in another country. That time, there wasn't even a word for human trafficking. Nobody had this kind of phrase. As a result of us digging into it, thinking that maybe this was just something unique between Nepal and India, came to realize that all over the world you have these people who are tricked and deceived and forced into prostitution. So for whatever reason, something about this topic really was in my DNA. It just, I would hear and I'd get very upset. But the thing that kind of put me over the line that made me into an activist was actually going to the brothels where these girls ended up. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. I had a police officer with me, went into one of the brothels, and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. This girl saw this Caucasian guy, saw an opportunity, literally ran up, wrapped herself around me and said, "Save me, they're doing terrible things to me." As I was looking down at this girl who's hysterically crying, I turned to the police officer and said, "I need to get this girl out of here." He said, "We can't do that." I said, "What are you talking about? You're a police officer." He says, "If we try to leave with her, we'll both be killed." To make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot of police, but of course she was gone. Now I tell this story because I wasn't one of those 15-year-olds that said when I grow up I want to be an activist. In fact, I did everything I could not to be. Every once in a while in life we're tested. That was my big test. I failed miserably. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and did what a lot of activists eventually do, surrendered to the fact that this is what I'm going to do with my life, and 35 years later here I am doing this. So as a result of this journey, kind of experiencing all of these things related to, the developmental issues that exist around the world, I eventually got to a point where I really felt like I needed to dedicate my life to addressing this issue. So I did it from the perspective of a donor, a government, the United Nations, INGO, and then that eventually led to the Mekong Club, which I set up 12 years ago here in Hong Kong.
And so in terms of, I guess just for our many participants out there, can you give us a quick breakdown of how you're defining human trafficking, modern slavery? There's a lot of terms that we may use today or they may come across. Can we just kind of give them some perspective or context in terms of like the way that you're describing them? What does that mean?
Okay, so you can almost in some ways interchange different terminology. Forced labor, human trafficking, modern slavery, they all have similarities in terms of a person losing control of their life, basically in many cases not getting paid, being held in place by debt and threat. As a result of that, you have people in this situation where from a labor perspective, they're exploited and exploited in an extreme way. According to the statistics, about 50 million people in modern slavery around the world, about 23 million of that would be forced marriages, where a person enters a marriage with the expectation of not being in a loving relationship, but basically to work for the family. The other 27 million would be forced labor, which includes 6.3 million for forced prostitution. There's a certain amount of that that's also state-sponsored forced labor. This would be countries like North Korea, for example, where you have that type of activity taking place. The number of people who enter per year is estimated around 9.2 million. That translates to about 25,000 a day. And then that comes down to 1 every 4 seconds. So if we count to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, another person somewhere in the world entering into modern slavery. Here in Asia, about 55% of the victims are in this part of the world. for two reasons. Big population sizes. China, 1.4 billion. India, 1.4 billion. Japan, Philippines, all of those countries have big populations. The other thing is the kind of feudal systems that have been in place for generations in these countries have never been completely dismantled. As a result of that, you see a lot of people entering into a modern slavery type situation. The other statistics that are relevant, the profits generated from modern slavery just went up from 150 billion, they recalculated them, to 236 billion a year. The amount of money that's available to address this is about 350 million globally. And last year, the world helped about 108,000 victims. Put those mathematical formulas together, it means we're helping around 0.2% of the victims, not even 0.5%. And so part of the reason for that is the number of do-gooders like us is about 30, 40,000. The number of criminals about 500,000. And awareness on this particular topic is extremely low. Very few people know about it. As a result of that, if you don't know about an issue, you're not going to care. If you don't care, you're not going to do anything.
Yeah, I think it's especially true if you're maybe directly or indirectly a beneficiary of that particular issue.